a brief intro of Gilad, His Excellency, the Ambassador to the United Nations. Until recently, Erdan served as Israel's ambassador to the United States, the first person to hold both roles concurrently since Abba Evan in the 1950s. During Ambassador Erdan's tenure at the United Nations, he initiated and passed a critical resolution in the UN General Assembly combating Holocaust denial, making it only the second time in the history of that Israel led a resolution. It was actually passed at the United Nations. As a steadfast defender of Israel in a place where anti-Israelites are institutionalized, Ambassador Erdan constantly fights for Israel on the world stage and makes the truth heard loud and clear. Let's break it down now, because you work in one of the more hostile environment to the state of Israel out there, and you're doing a daily work combating the lies that are being told. Could you explain why is there so much anti-Israel bias at the United Nations? Because I was listening to one of your recent speeches in which you referred to the international community as an ostrich that's putting its head in the sand. You did so because they compared between the State of Israel and Palestinian terror organizations. Do countries really behave like that in one-on-one conversations in the UN corridors, or is it just a media stunt that they're doing?
So first, thank you for this important question. But before I begin, I want to thank you for the warm introduction, and also to thank the Besheva group for organizing this wonderful and important event. I can't really see who's here, but I thank you all, because I know anyone sitting in this room is a supporter of the pioneers in Eretz Israel. So thank you very much for everything you're doing. Coming back to your question, and I'll try to be brief. We all remember the famous expression that the first Prime Minister of Israel, Ben-Gurion, used to say about the UN, Shmum. It's like Joe Schmo, because he believed that it's not really important what the UN says. The most important part is what the Jewish people are doing. And he was correct at the time. Today, when we have social media and our enemies are trying to criminalize the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we have to fight the anti-Israeli resolution, because they might be used in courts all around the world, even the ICC, against our soldiers. They might be used to inflame radicalized anti-Semitic attacks, as we've seen during Operation Guardian of the Walls, or it might be used to put pressure, these resolutions, on companies like Ben & Jerry's to boycott Israel. So what do? I try to use two main tactics to break this anti-Israeli majority at the UN. Today, it's important to understand the UN is comprised not only with 57 member states, as it used to be when they decided to establish the Jewish state in 1947. Today there are 193 member states. You can't have a thorough discussion with 193. So they are divided to either regional or religious groups that decide together. That's how, coming back to your question, you can find countries that have great bilateral relations with Israel on the one hand. On the other hand, they have to comply with their Muslim group that instructs them to vote against the state of Israel. So my role is to convince countries to break away from their groups. How do I do it? Sometimes I find a mutual interest, like with the African countries, to show them how Israelis are connecting their villages to running water or electricity, giving them life, or showcasing during our Independence Day celebration how our food tech companies can provide them food security. This is one tactic. The other tactic, and to end my short answer, the other tactic is that I believe that we should always be on the offensive, always to expose the hypocrisy and lies of our enemies. That's what I did for example, when I saw that the UN doesn't recognize the rock-throwing terror that Israelis were facing on roads in Judea and Samaria or Jerusalem. So I smuggled a real rock into the Security Council discussion to demonstrate and to tell them that's what you have to think about when you discuss the situation in Israel. Or when I tore up the annual Human Rights Council report on Guardian of the Wall. So we already see some successes, like we convinced Hungary, the Czech Republic, Guatemala, Brazil, Pacific Island countries to break away and to vote with us. Today at the Israel parade, you could see other countries joining us. So I'm quite optimistic that in the future, it's not going to happen overnight, we'll be able to diminish this automatic majority against Israel.
You mentioned the entire world. I want to focus on Europe now. There are certain voices in the media and within the international community claiming that Israel is not doing enough to help Ukraine. They say, you're not giving them weapons, you're not providing them with the Iron Dome missile defense system, and so on. Can you explain what is Israel's stance vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine? Where do we fall exactly?
I'm so happy that you asked me this question, because I'm being asked about it time and again. And I have to, as you said, clarify our position. Whoever says that Israel is not clearly on Ukraine's side is either speaks from ignorance or he has a political motivation against Israel. Because I can testify firsthand. I'm Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. So many times we condemned the Russian aggression. We joined all the Western world resolutions, again, condemning Russia and supporting the sovereignty of Ukraine, even though everyone knows we are in a very complex, unique situation when it comes to Russia, because Russia is literally on our border. Russia has the most significant military forces within Syria, and we built this mechanism to cooperate our military, coordinate basically military strikes in Syria. And there's a danger to this kind of mechanism when we oppose Russia on the international stage. But nevertheless, we support Ukraine, and not only with our votes, because we truly believe in Tikkun Olam, and we truly believe that whoever saves even one life is as if they saved an entire world. So we were the first country to send a state-of-the-art field hospital or hundreds of tons of humanitarian aid to help the Ukrainian people. And you could see Jewish organizations like UJA, Hatzalah from Israel, being incentivized by our government to help and assist the Ukrainian people. And I truly pray and hope that this conflict would end soon.
So in what pertains Ukraine, I want to speak about some kind of double standard and shift the conversation to mention Iran, because we're learning that world powers might be closer than ever to seal the deal and revive the JCPOA that, as we know, did not help prevent their aggressions in the region, their hostilities and so on. But as world powers are doing that, they are, joining arms together in their fight to counter Russia's aggressions against Ukraine. So you see this effort on one side, and then you don't see it when it comes to Iran, which is an evil force that wants to annihilate the Jewish state. How do you explain that?
So for Israel, coming back to your first question, I want to connect it to this important question. I mean, we all understand that Iran, this is the most serious, crucial threat against the future of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. And now we see the inability, the fundamental inability of the international community to stop Iran's race, advancement towards becoming a nuclear threshold. And one cannot understand how come they don't see that this is not only an existential threat against Israel. I hear so many voices, there are leaders that are bothered from the fact that President Putin might use his nuclear power. Well, I have a surprise for you. Just imagine what would happen if the crazy radical Ayatollahs are going to hold nuclear capabilities. How would they they'll be able to threaten the world?
So briefly, what can be done? What can Israel do?
First of all, this is not the time to lift sanctions from Iran by rejoining the old fundamental flawed deal that is not going to stop Iran's race towards a bomb. It doesn't even address the other threats that Iran poses, like their nuclear ballistic missiles or their malign activities to support terrorist organizations that surround Israel. The time has come to implement the wise words of President Roosevelt, meaning speak softly but carry also a big stick. For many years, the international community have spoken softly with the Iranian regime, but they were never presented with a credible military threat that would basically force them to decide between their own survival as a regime and their nuclear ambitions. This is the time to do it. I hope the international community would come to this understanding. But one last sentence, because this is maybe the most important part. Whatever, coming back to Ben-Gurion, whatever the international community is going to do, whether they're going to join the deal or not rejoin the deal, we made it clear to everyone. Israel won't be bound by any international agreement, because for us it is an existential threat. We are the only ones being threatened with annihilation by the crazy Ayatollahs, and whatever we will have to do in order to secure our future, that is exactly what we will do.
And
thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Erdan. We appreciate you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.